Fox News Podcasts presents the Bret Baier Podcast with Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier.
President Trump is back at the White House after a successful trip negotiating a trade agreement with the European Union, narrowly avoiding a potential trade war and opening up both the American and European economies to further commerce.
I think it would be the biggest deal each of us has ever struck. So I'm very much looking forward.
Ever struck by anybody. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Meanwhile, a new Wall Street Journal poll revealed that 63% of voters hold an unfavorable view of the Democratic Party, marking the highest unfavorability rating in 35 years. And while many voters disapprove of President Trump's handling of key issues, they have more faith in Republicans to handle them than Democrats. To discuss all of this and more, we bring in our panel. USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page, former South Carolina Congressman, host of the Trey Gowdy Podcast Trey Gowdy, and Fox News senior White House correspondent Jacqui Heinrich. Jacqui, you've been on this trip to Scotland. It seems like the White House is pretty happy with what they're coming away with.
They're definitely happy with what they're coming away with. You know, the president put the chances of a successful deal at 50-50 just, the day before he met with the EU Commission president and was able to squeeze out of them pretty much full access to these markets that they'd been locked out of for so long at a 0% rate. The automobile factor is very, very big. The energy purchase factor is very big. And then getting the EU to agree to 15%. I did ask the White House, why is the EU getting a 15% rate? They'd been trying to get the 10% that the UK got. And the president also said at the end of his bilateral meeting, one of them that was this week, that the tariff for the world that he might impose on everybody would be in the 15 to 20% range. So why is the EU not getting something better? And they basically said this was about the EU giving to us. They've been, in their words, really sticking it to us for a very long time, and they had to do better, and they did do better, which is why the president was able to squeeze so much out of the deal. He's obviously riding very high on that. And you had the Treasury Secretary say that the Chinese took note of that when they were having their talks in Sweden, and that they were a little bit more receptive to conversations, seeing his ability to muscle these negotiations out of the second largest economy in the world after the U.S.
Yeah, Susan, the China talks, they're being characterized as going well. There was some concern about the Chinese buying a lot of Iranian oil, but according to the president, the Treasury Secretary is reporting positive things. We're still at the beginning, it seems, of that back and forth. But that seems like the big kahuna in all of these different trade deals.
Yes, that would be the biggest one of all of them. But you can't underestimate the signal that's given by this EU settlement. The EU had been pretty defiant early on that they were prepared to fight the United States as the United States was going to impose these tariffs. But President Trump has managed to pretty much reorder the world economy along the lines of his vision. And what we're going to look to see is what the impact is over the long term. So far, we have not seen the catastrophic economic consequences that critics had predicted. That could also have an effect on whether these Chinese talks go well. The idea that this is just the way things work now, and this tariff regime can be put in place without upending the global economy.
Yeah, and Trey, that's a major thing. I mean, if you think about back to so-called Liberation Day, April 2nd, and the sky is falling kind of reporting, and the market's really jittery and losing, and then the comeback since then, now banking about $130 billion from tariff revenue while not seeing massive inflation as predicted is pretty amazing.
And the stock market, with episodic exceptions, it seems to be hitting record highs. I didn't see it. I was a little skeptical. I thought it would take maybe 18 months to see any benefits, if any, from the president's trade position, but I have to concede he was right and the naysayers were wrong. I also think my co-panelists have put their fingers on the biggest, observer to what happened this week, and that would be China. Those negotiations are going to be much tougher. They're not military allies. They're not cultural friends. They have a lot of consumers, and they send a lot of products here, but there are so many issues, Bret, from cyber, IP, AI, Taiwan, if he can pull that one off, maybe he'll get a Nobel Prize, but it won't be for peace.
Yeah. I mean, he did talk about that, Jacqui, on this trip, the fact that he had conversations with Thailand and Cambodia, and now they're in a ceasefire. He's obviously talked about India and Pakistan and that effort to get to peace for two nuclear powers. He does seem in the mode of deal maker in chief, and wants to keep that role going.
He absolutely does. And he's had a lot of success stopping wars. He points out that there would be 5 wars going on right now if he wasn't in the White House. The one area where he's running into, a little bit of trouble is with Putin. And it came as, a little bit of a surprise to all of us who've been following that story that he reduced the deadline pretty suddenly from 50 days to 10 for Putin to agree to a peace deal. And then he conceded to reporters on Air Force One on his way back to DC that he hasn't gotten a response out of Russia yet, that didn't seem to move the needle. And he also said, look, the tariffs, the sanctions that we put on as a result of this may or may not move them, because it looks like Putin really just wants to continue this war. He's been pretty downcast, I think, in how he feels about his dealings with Russia, admitting that he believed that Putin would want to get this thing done. He has asked for trade deals, and that there were a lot of incentives for Putin to want to work with Trump and get this thing negotiated to a reasonable settlement. And that he's been dismayed to see that Putin has been playing games effectively, saying all the right things and then doing the exact opposite. And that has frustrated him a lot. So I think what the administration does next, if he's already signaling that the tariffs and the sanctions may not be enough to move Russia, is going to be something that we should watch.
Susan, the options are probably many. There is this bill, bipartisan bill, Lindsey Graham and others, for sanctioning Russia and secondary sanctions on other countries that do business with Russia. The White House has not been willing to give up that power, I guess. But what they choose to do to get Putin to the table, whether it's stepping up support for Ukraine or it is putting the pinch on the economy, is yet to be seen.
Let's not lose sight of how different this is from what we thought Trump would be like internationally as president. He talked about America first. He depicted a role for the United States that had pulled back from some of its traditional alliances and from its role as the world's policeman. And here he is, deeply involved all across the world. He's changed his stance on Ukraine. He's getting involved in Gaza. He's split somewhat with Netanyahu on the issue of whether there's a famine in Gaza. Even Cambodia and Thailand, these are not the issues we envisioned a President Trump as interjecting himself on. But I think he's found he likes the influence that he can exercise, the way he can get foreign governments, foreign leaders to come to terms, or at least to move toward one another if he gives them a big push.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I left out Congo and Rwanda, but they're not on the day-to-day diet of news for a lot of Americans, but they're important in their part of the world.
Panel, we'll hold it right there.
Trey, one of the things that did not escape, despite these successes on this trip, was the talk of Epstein and, where this is going to go and what the next steps are here. There's a lot of people in polls that suggest that they're not super interested in it. However, that doesn't mean the story is anywhere near going away.
Yeah, I mean, with Epstein, so they indicted him once. He killed himself in prison awaiting trial. So there has to be evidence sufficient for the government to have charged him. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted. She's serving a sentence. The part that worries me a little bit, Brett, is, no one believed Ghislaine Maxwell when she said she was innocent. No one believed her when she said she had nothing to do with sex trafficking of young women. So why would we believe her now? She has a built-in incentive to lie. She wants a sentence reduction. We saw that today. She's asking for immunity, or she wants what the feds call a Rule 35, which is a sentence reduction. She doesn't want to die in prison. So she has a built-in, look, I spent the better part of my career putting people in prison who did what Jeffrey Epstein is accused of doing. So I'd like to see it all. But I want the victims protected, and I want the perpetrators held responsible. The politics of it is of less interest to me. So how this story keeps getting, I mean, every day something sets fire to it again. Going to see Ghislaine Maxwell, that was a political risk because, I mean, he cannot pardon her. I don't know if his advisors are telling him that or not, but you cannot pardon someone who sex trafficked young women.
Yeah. And that is a question, Jacqui. You know, there's all kinds of different stories out there trying to read the politics of this moment. One just popped up saying, is Epstein the new Russiagate? In other words, media, political types are obsessed with the story, but does it mean it's penetrated into the broader public? I mean, I kind of think the answer is yes, because of the MAGA element to it, and the attention it got on both sides. But whether Democrats are seeing upside in Epstein focus, I saw Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, doing some videotape where he did a whole thing on just Epstein. And I'm just not sure that that's going to sell for them ahead of 26. Who knows?
Well, it also might backfire on them because I think the president has made pretty clear that he's annoyed with the story because he genuinely feels like he's got, nothing to hide here. And, he answers the questions when he gets them. He today on Air Force One revealed that Virginia Giuffre was working at the spa and Jeffrey Epstein poached her from Mar-a-Lago. And that's a reason why he kicked him out of the club. He still sort of indulges the conversation about it, which I think he wouldn't be doing if there was a there. But he's annoyed that it keeps, pounding, the drum keeps pounding on this story, and it's happening, through the media, obviously. At the same time, I think you have this situation where the base feels an unfinished sense of justice because as recently as the campaign, you had people within the president's orbit, his cabinet in some cases, talking about how Democrats, were protecting pedophiles by not releasing the whole shebang with the Epstein files. And then to jump from that, where there was an expectation of accountability under a Trump administration, to saying, we're actually not going to put anything else out there. There's really nothing credible in there that needs to be released. There was no explanation for why people should believe that. And I think the need to give that explainer to the base sort of is what the Democrats are seizing on as an opening to exploit this and try to pull away some of the support that the president has. But I'm not sure in the long run that they're going to find anything that is so salacious. It probably would have been out. When you talk about Ghislaine Maxwell, she's had every reason to use every tool in her toolbox to get out of jail, and she hasn't been able to do it yet. So whatever, she's suggesting might be there is questionable, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there was 2 days of interviews of her by Justice Department officials, Susan, and, listen, this is going to continue until they come forward with something or something changes. That said, the president's on a number of different topics, hoping that it goes away, but it doesn't seem like it's going to.
You reap what you sow. And President Trump, Donald Trump, before he was president, relied on conspiracy theories to build support. Birtherism with Barack Obama was just one of them. So he has built his support among people who are inclined to see conspiracy theories, and that's one reason he got elected, because he promised to be straight with them. And then the idea that the Justice Department, that Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, would first say she had a client list on her desk and then said there wasn't any client list.
It was messy,
fed these.
100%. It was messy.
Yeah. I don't think this does Democrats any good, but I think it does Trump some harm with people's support, and people who are suspicious become suspicious of Trump despite their great faith in him. I don't think they're going to vote Democratic, but I think they might not vote.
Yeah. So next up on the hit parade is really, Trey, Congress trying to get its act together. They've got to figure out how to fund a government by September. And in the meantime, the Senate is attempting to deal with these nominees that the president's put forward. There are about 150 still in line. A lot of it has to do with Democrat recalcitrance and slowing up the process. But it's going to be a long time before all of these people, second tier in agencies, are going to be able to be inside.
You're right, Brett. It's not just second-tier agencies either. It's U.S. attorneys. I mean, that's the front line in the war on crime. We're seeing that play out right now with judges removing interim U.S. attorneys and lack of confirmation hearings. You've got judges. Emile Bove is up for a judgeship right now, but that's a slow process. I think, the president, his first term, he confirmed a lot of judges. I think the Democrats are heck bent on making sure that doesn't happen again. I will say this: the Senate has worked through the night on occasion. The Senate friends I have are never home. So I don't think it's a lack of, I don't think they're going on vacation. I think that's just an easy thing for folks to allege. It's just the Senate works either by unanimous consent or exhaustion. And they're not exhausted yet. The Democrats still have some plays to make. On the House side, Mike Johnson's already pulled a number of miracles, but the reality is Donald Trump is the Speaker of the House, and I say that with no disrespect to Mike whatsoever. He's a wonderful person, but speakers don't make people fearful for their reelection. Trump does. So he is both the president and the Speaker right now.
Yeah, we'll see on the nominees if they get a deal. This is the first president at this point who has not had a unanimous consent or voice vote for a number of different nominees. So we'll see. Panel, thanks so much. Now for a bit of history. On July 29th, 1958, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act of 1958, marking the birth of the agency now known as NASA. NASA would go on to conduct more than 200 successful crewed flights. Today, NASA has more than 80 active science missions, including the Artemis program, which aims to land humans on the moon for the first time in more than half a century and establish a permanent outpost there. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com, wherever you download podcasts. Make sure to leave a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Susan, Trey, and Jacqui, I'm Brett Baer. We'll see you next time.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.